This is almost a week since that shocking explosion along Lillian Ngoyi Street. Now, well, Lillian Ngoyi is what it's called now. Many of you would have known it a long time ago as Bree Street near the taxi rank. The explosion left at least one person dead and injured just over 40 others. Over 20 vehicles, including taxis, with passengers inside, were affected in the disaster. Let's speak now to the Johannesburg Mayor, Kabelo Gwamanda, who's joining us here on News at Prime. A very good evening to you, Mayor. Welcome to News at Prime. So, are you any closer to actually establishing what caused that gas explosion?
Good evening, and good evening to your viewers. We have engineers working tirelessly around the clock. The issue that we are faced with is the fact that service delivery is interrupted, and it's bordering on the lines of human rights, because we had to cut off the water supply as well as the electricity supply and isolate the supply of those services so that we can be able to determine lower numbers of or percentages of gases within the vicinity that is affected. We would not want to, in fact, rush the process in a manner that would even compromise the officials that have been tasked to be on the ground and to make the determination. The area has not yet been deemed safe entirely, because there are traces of methane gas that still exist within some of the cracks that exist in the road infrastructure. However, the service providers that are on the job understand the important nature of them getting a determination so that we can be able to speedily restore our services in the city of Johannesburg.
Can you really restore services until you've established what actually caused the explosion? In other words, also determining what is going on beneath the surface of that road that would require fixing, perhaps in the medium to long term?
Yes, we are indeed getting closer, because there is only one stretch of pipes that need to be examined. We are also waiting for the lab tests. As soon as we are able to pinpoint, in fact, what exactly, or rather the source, because we know how the incident was triggered. It was triggered by methane with a combination of oxygen and a spark. But the actual cause, because the assessment that was conducted between ourselves and one of the companies that has a pipeline, which is Equally Gas, there was no determination that Equally Gas had the leak that could have ultimately warranted the explosion of that nature. And there are quite there's a wide variety of speculation as well around what could have in fact triggered this particular explosion. However, due to the magnitude of this incident, we want to be diligent in our investigation, so as to not be quick to pass judgment or blame or pin or try to play a game with what might potentially have been the cause. We need to have accurate, factual, and proven answers to the questions that most of our residents are anticipating.
You've mentioned in your response methane as far as what could be in the mix which would have led to the explosion last Wednesday. Methane is a highly flammable gas. So if that was indeed what led to this, or there was indeed methane in the mix, if you will, in terms of this explosion, has anyone been able to tell you why, for example, there wasn't a fire which followed what happened?
They have not, in fact, been able to provide that report as yet. It's an ongoing process. However, it in fact caused a high pressure explosion, and in the main it was contributed to the manholes that have been sealed off, and over time the cavity as well as other contributing factors that warranted that in fact emanated in this eruption as opposed to an explosion. Yes.
So with that in mind, Mayor, can the city rule out the possibility that there may very well be danger beneath the surface around Lillian Gway Street, or something else brewing that may be yet to be detected?
Yes, we are not ruling out that there might be possibilities, and I'm saying that on the basis that we have called on site experts in the technology space, so that we can not only fly drones into the area but also use thermal and infrared technology to try and get a determination whether the pipes belong to the city of Johannesburg or they belong to private service provider. We understand that amongst those that we are informed about, there may be some infrastructure that we are unaware of. So we are trying to identify as much infrastructure as the city of Johannesburg has underneath, so that we can be able to determine or pronounce that it is indeed safe after we've made that determination. Yeah.
There's been some reporting, Mayor Gwamanda, around this issue from the Daily Maverick, in fact, in the last 3 days or so, suggesting that one of the reasons why the city of Johannesburg has not been able to determine what caused the explosion, this gas explosion, for fact since Wednesday, is because you don't have the necessary skills to be able to do that work, or at least to do it with speed. Is that true?
So as you would have picked up in my representation, is that administratively we have a panel of service providers that we are able to appoint on an emergency basis. Those expertise that the city does not have, it has the ability to outsource from experts.
So you don't have these skills
and services. It's an issue of finding the necessary experience in the field.
So they're not within your employ as the city. You don't have people who work for the city of Johannesburg who would have had the skills to crack down on this or give us a conclusive, response, if you will. You don't have those sort of engineers or experts.
In the area of forensics, which is what is required, but the detection, the city has been able to achieve through EMS, but beyond that, we have outsourced the service because we do not have it in our EMS department. Yes.
Do you think it's something you should prioritize having within your department?
Yes, when you are encountered with situations of this nature, although not isolated to the city of Johannesburg, as you would know, it happened in other parts of the world. It is a learning opportunity for the city of Johannesburg, so that we can be able to put in place measures that would enable us to respond better moving forward. It was an unfortunate incident that transpired, but it gave us an opportunity to also consider a wide variety of areas that we need to strengthen our services on.
How quickly will you do that?
It's as you know, the government has prescripts in which needs to be followed to the letter, lest we run the risk of bordering into the lines of political overreach. So in the next mayoral committee that I'm scheduling later this week, I will then be in a position to table the findings that we would have come up with and then recommend our next course of action that can be ultimately tabled in council, and we have council approval, because my executive authority is limited.
Right.
The city, through council, has to be the one that ultimately takes the decision of certain actions that need to be taken.
This sounds as though it's going to be a very costly exercise. You have to fix the road itself, Lillian Gway. You're also relying on basically private business, outsourcing services from the investigation and so forth. Have you been given figures as to how much this will cost the city of Johannesburg?
So earlier today, before I went on site, I had a meeting with the task team that has been formulated to deal specifically with this particular challenge. And part of the questions that I have or had at the time was, how much is this going to cost? And are we going to have to make a declaration of some sort in terms of how we define this particular incident that would then give us an indication as to whether the city will have to reprioritize its budget from within, or then have to reach out to either provincial or national government for additional funding that will be required for us to restore the road infrastructure in Liliengoy. Mm-hmm. So at this point, we do not have specific figures as to the estimated cost of the repairs, because it is going to take a bit of investigating for us to ultimately determine the stability of the surface.
But how is it, Mayor, pardon me,
infrastructure.
How is it that almost 1 week on, you don't, as the mayor or the city, have a clear indication of the cause of the explosion? You also don't know how much it will cost you to fix what has been damaged. How much will it cost you, for example, to pay these outsourced to pay for the outsourced services? How much is that going to cost? What are you spending on those investigators? Do you have that cost?
I do not have access to the forum because it has to do with procurement. And as a political head, I have limitations when it comes to that regard. I will have to be given a report that outlines specifically what the budget was that was spent. And I understand the sentiment in which would warrant a question of that nature, because prior to us having to establish a quotation of how much it's going to cost, we need to establish the stability of the surface itself. We cannot try to deploy services in an area where we can further compromise, because the one thing that EMS in particular has been trying to prevent to date is a secondary incident. And now that we have come to a determination that it's eliminated, we can then proceed to move on to other areas that we need to define.
So that's fixing the road. What I was asking is what you're going to spend on the investigators who are now helping you to establish the actual cause of the explosion. Has anything been reported to you officially as mayor? I know you don't get involved in the procurement process, but what report have you been given about what those experts are going to cost the metro?
Yes, it falls because we have to issue out. It's a process that administration has to undergo, as alluded to, and I think the cost for each discipline that has been outsourced by the city will then be consolidated into one cost that would then be tabled in a meeting that I'll form part of officially, where everything has been determined and everything has been finalized, so that I do not have sight of which service provider, who's the service provider, and the cost that may have been charged for the services. So I'm not allowed.
All right.
I cannot fall within that particular scope, yes.
And when will that meeting be where you would be informed?
It's going to happen later this week. I've given them a duration of time for them to give a conclusive report so that I can be able to table to the mayoral committee, and we then decide on the next course of action.
And just to be certain, Mayor Gwamanda, last question. Are these private companies to whom the services would have been outsourced, are they already on the ground working, or are we still very early on in the procurement stage?
So there's a emergency procurement process that would originally be undertaken should there be a need, and that need is determined, of course, by the co-administration. Now, the service provider that I am alluding to, I'm sure you would have seen the technical team and the briefings that were led by the city manager. Some of the experts formed part of the panel so that we can be able to provide technical responses to some of the underlying questions that the public has.
Okay. Kabelo Gwamanda,
so they are on the ground.
Pardon me for cutting you off there. Mayor of Johannesburg, Kabelo Gwamanda, good to speak to you, sir. Thank you for your time tonight.